Hey, what's going on, friends, and welcome to the new series on the lore of various Slayer creatures within Runescape. I really hope you guys enjoy the episode, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and you can find all the podcast content on podcast hosting platforms outside of YouTube. Peace. Runescape Lore Slayer Creatures Chapter 2 Ripper Demons. Ripper Demons are a branch of Synthonian who lived during the God Wars under the forces of the mighty Zamorak. One such demon, simply known as the Ripper, was used as an assassin to kill important targets such as heroes and commanders in the Sardamis ranks. And it is important to note that it seemed to always act alone, whereas most other Ripper demons work in packs. Our tale starts with Sergeant Mazakone, a male Icene commander for Sardamin in the God Wars. He had dark blue skin, and whilst a very capable and extremely talented fighter, he had become crippled, having lost an arm and a leg and not able to use his broken wings to fly. He had replacement limbs created from pottery that was used to create the golems of Uzer, a supposedly common practice for Icene during the God Wars. Mazakone led a troop of soldiers and a woman named Elspeth, a singer and musician who played stirring songs with her sithara, to a village that would in present day be east of Al-Kharid. The villager's elder, a man by the name of Tazgal, was Mazakone's target location to rally more troops for Sardmin's cause. In one of the only surviving original texts from the God Wars era, titled The Song from Before the War, written from the viewpoint of the village citizens, reads,
"When I first saw Elspeth, I was at the edge of my village, looking out over the front. Two distant lines of fire stood out against the evening landscape, like smoldering coals thrown across a dark blanket. Sparks would shoot across the gap between the lines, burning arrows or war mages' spells. I couldn't see individual soldiers, but sometimes I could see the blue and red lights circling above the lines. Icene and demons locked in aerial combat. I've been told it was impossible to hear the sounds of battle from this distance, but sometimes, when the wind was right, I imagined that I could. The heroic battle cries of our Icene commanders, the blare of signal trumpets, and the savage screams of demons. I was straining to hear the sounds of battle when I noticed the crunch of footsteps on the path leading up to my village's plateau. I watched the bend in the path until the visitors came into view. At first, I thought I was seeing an adult leading a group of children, but then I saw the feathered wings folded at the leader's back and realized that he was an Icene, and what I had taken for children were ordinary-sized humans. There were a dozen soldiers on foot, and one figure riding side saddle on a white horse. A woman, wrapped in a gray cloak and clutching something in her arms. At the time, I didn't look twice at her. My eyes went back to the radiant giant leading the group. An Icene! A holy Icene of Saradomin was visiting our village! I ran back to the village hall and breathlessly told Elder Tazgal what I had seen. He looked from his meal wearily, then held out a hand. I passed him his crutch and helped him stand. Tazgal had lost one of his legs at the front 10 years ago. "We might as well start rounding people up," he sighed. Elder Tazgal was right. When the Icene and his party arrived at the village an hour later, and Elder Tazgal met them at the gates, the first thing the winged figure said was, "I am Sergeant Mazakone of the army of Saradomin. Assemble your people in your great hall. We will address your village tonight."
Mazakone introduced Elspeth, a human Icene hybrid, to sing for the village, causing many men to join the raiding party. Elder Tazgal was unhappy about that, arguing that they were taking too many conscripts for too little gain. Mazakone ridiculed him, claiming his human lifespan made him blind to the reality of the situation. The text continues by saying,
"People of Saradomin," Mazakone boomed, "I am here to present to you one of your own. A human, though with Icene blood in her veins. A holy warrior who has slain a dozen of Zamorak's demons, not with a sword or spell, but with her voice. And she is here now to sing to you tales of the war. Ladies and gentlemen, Elsbeth of the Cythera." Mazakone stepped aside, and the woman who'd arrived with him walked to the center of the stage. In her hands she held an instrument like a lyre or a small harp. She had shed the gray cloak, and beneath it she wore a white dress cut to show off her figure. There were some catcalls from the audience as she walked forward, but everyone went quiet when she plucked her cithara and started to sing. Her voice was breathtakingly beautiful. As soon as she began singing, I was transported to a world of glorious battle, of absolute good vanquishing absolute evil, of Icene and demons dueling atop the towers of legendary cities, while the joyous army of Saradomin marched forward to victory. Watching the beautiful Icene-blooded woman, hearing her perfect, piercing soprano voice, I think I fell in love with her right then. I think every young man in the audience did. She sang a song from the point of view of a soldier's sweetheart, about how proud she was of her man, and how she knew Saradomin would send him home safely. She sang about a soldier dying on the battlefield and looking back over his service, thinking how proud he was to be dying for Saradomin rather than growing old. She sang about the Icene commanders waiting at the front, knowing that they would achieve a decisive victory if only a few good men came to their aid. "Who will fight with us?" went the refrain, Elsbeth's haunting soprano floating above the cithara's chords. "Who will fight with us today?"
After Elspeth's rousing song, things start to settle down for the evening, but the villager couldn't seem to rest easy tonight, with the thought of battle looming its ugly head. Whilst aimlessly walking the streets under the guise of a full moon, he runs once again into Elspeth, who asks to sing him another song, this time not of Saradomin, not of war, a chilling ballad of a man with whom she cared so much for. As her final notes came to a close, Elspeth and the villager came to recognize an unfamiliar glow in the distance. Their nostrils filling with the stench of burnt flesh from their resting spot on the plateau overlooking the cliffs. Elspeth turns to the villager. "It's found us." In the song from before the war text, it continues.
I ran forward and grabbed a sword from beside the body of one of the fallen soldiers, but then, may Saradomin forgive me, I hesitated. I should have thrown myself into the fray. The creature would have killed me in a moment, but that moment might have distracted it from Mazakone and given him the chance to smite it. Mazakone looked in my direction, his eyes furious. The creature's last attack had left 3 wide claw marks across his chest that were streaming with dark blood. I thought he was going to order me into the fight, but he was looking past me. "Sing, useless human woman!" he yelled. "Sing or Zamorak take you!" I spun around. Elsbeth was shaking with fear, tears streaming down her face. But she obeyed her sergeant's order and raised her cithara into playing position. Her fingers plucked the strings and a chord rang out, then another. I recognized the beginning of the first song I had heard her play in the town hall, the one about the young sweetheart waiting for her soldier to return. The monster stopped in its tracks. It let out a piercing howl, as if trying to drown the music out, and then charged straight at Elsbeth. I raised the sword. I had failed to defend Mazakone, but perhaps I could stand between the monster and Elsbeth. I caught a glimpse of its face, gaunt and skull-like, skin a deep demonic red, eyes glowing with Zamorakian rage. It raised its horrible claws. Then Elsbeth sang the first word of the song. Her voice trembled at first, but became loud and clear after the first few notes. The demon stopped in its tracks, skidding on the gravel. It howled skywards and covered its ears, its long claws locking into a cage around its head. It was as if the woman from the song were standing there in Elsbeth's robes. It was as if her love and her faith projected a barrier that the demon could not cross.
With Mazakon now brutally slashed up on the verge of unconsciousness, the demon turning towards the villager, eye to eye. The Ripper hisses, loudly, but decides to run off. Immediately, they rush over to the dying commander, the villager taking charge of the remaining survivors as the town elder, Tazgal, had perished. Everyone was able to relocate to the town hall, where the rest of the village supplies were held, and the one place fortified enough to hold off the ravished demon. After attending Mazakon's wounds, they were still unable to stop his impending death. But Elspeth had a plan to lay his body outside to act as a trophy. Maybe, if the Ripper saw his target, it would be over. The text continues.
"The Icene is dead!" I shouted into the night. "You've completed your mission! Why don't you leave?" A distant howl responded, and I ran back into the hall. I stood with Elsbeth at the doors and looked down the road. The fires had died down, but I could see Sergeant Mazakon's body in the moonlight. Elsbeth was singing quietly, the melody still perfect, but all the emotion long gone from her voice. After a couple of minutes, I saw movement as a dark rag-wrapped shape rushed to the body from between two houses. There was a sickening crack of tearing flesh and bone, and then the Ripper raised its claws to the sky and let out a blood-chilling howl. "Leave us alone," Elsbeth whispered tearfully, still plucking cords with trembling fingers. "Why can't you leave us alone?" The Ripper looked right at us, red eyes smoldering from beneath its ragged cloak. It hissed and began to walk towards us along the road, claws slashing left and right as if cutting through the forest of sound that had been keeping it at bay. "What does it want with us?" I exclaimed. "It's killed its target!" "No, it hasn't," Elsbeth said. Her fingers plucked the same few notes over and over, as if she was no longer thinking about the music. Her eyes widened, and her voice trembled, as if a horrible realization were coming over her. "It wasn't here for Sergeant Mazakon. It's here for me." Elsbeth stepped across the threshold, out into the street. I stepped in front of her. "What are you saying?" "I can't sing forever. If it kills me, it may spare the rest of your village." She tried to walk past me, but I moved in front of her again. "I can't let you do this." "Please, let me come with you. Let me fight for you." She shrugged, as if she didn't have the will left to argue.
Elspeth knew what she had to do. Only one path left open in order to save these people. The Final Showdown is here. It reads,
The Ripper hissed and stood upright, stretching its massive claws out on either side. There was a stench of blood. Mazakon's body was a mutilated mess, and blood dripped from the monster's claws. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but this time I was not paralyzed with fear. I would like to say that my faith in Saradomin sustained me, but in that moment, I think it was Elsbeth who kept me moving. I would fight for her. If the demon wanted to kill her, it would have to get through me first. I let out an inarticulate cry and ran at the demon. It snarled, and then pain erupted in my legs as I was thrown aside. I heard a crack of bone. I tried to lift myself, but I couldn't. The demon had swiped at me with the back of its claw. I wasn't badly bleeding, but my legs were broken. The sword lay on the ground, out of my reach. I could only watch as Elspeth stepped forward and the demon turned its attention to her. She plucked her cithara. The Ripper raised its claws, but then she started to sing. The Ripper recoiled, clutching its ears. Elspeth's voice was tired and cracked, but still achingly beautiful, making me forget my pain. She was singing a familiar tune in a strange language. It was the same thing that Sergeant Mazzacone had sung in his delirium, the Icene love song from before the war. The Ripper let out a moan, a very human-sounding cry of anguish. It lowered its claws and cocked its head to one side. It was listening, I realized, listening as if the song awoke some wholesome memory in its evil Zamorakian heart. Elspeth's voice was rising to a climax. I had heard the tune enough times now to know what was coming. Her voice would soar in long, high notes above a complex cithara melody. The Ripper also seemed to know what was coming. It rose up in anticipation. The spell broke, as if the Ripper's bestial nature had won out over whatever emotions Elspeth's singing had triggered in its heart. It lunged forward, grabbed Elspeth in one claw, and ran the other one through her chest. Her cithara fell to the ground. But somehow, she transformed her scream of pain into the song's arcing descent. One piercing note that felt like it could stop a heart. With Elspeth in its claws, the demon could not cover its ears. It took that piercing note full in the face. It dropped Elspeth to the ground and staggered back, whimpering. For a moment, it looked at me. The red glow was fading from its eyes. The sun was rising behind me, and in its light, the demon's face looked very human, locked in a mask of anguish, its aggression gone. It clutched its claws to its chest and then bent in on itself and fell forward onto the gravel, next to the unmoving form of Elspeth. A few moments later, it smoldered and collapsed into a cloud of sulfur-smelling smoke and a pile of ash.
With the final conclusion between Elspeth and the Ripper now past them, the villagers tried picking up the pieces of their now shattered lives. Elspeth was buried overlooking the plateau along with her cithara, and many citizens still inspired to fight for Sardaman. The tale of the one piercing note will now live in history. The High Command got word of this and recognized Elspeth as a saint. This was the song from before the war. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back for the Ripper Part 2 in our next episode. Runescape forever.